Hi there, in this section we will install and explore the test-most framework that will allow us to unit test our Perl code. We will explore various methods that allow us to test different data types and scenarios. To be more precise, we will look at how we can test basic values such as strings and numbers, make sure that our reference contain expected data structure, make sure that our code throws expected exceptions, testing object methods and structure, organizing our tests, and other concepts. Alright, let's get started. So the first thing you want to do is you want to go to your browser and search for metacpan, to go to Perl module repository, and there you want to search for test::most. It's going to be most likely at the top there, so if you open it up, you're going to see that this module actually is composed from other various modules. Instead of importing specific test methods, you can just use the test::most. It's going to import functionality from different test modules that allow you to test exceptions or add extra debugging and so on and so on. So I recommend using test::most because it's kind of like a silver bullet solution, so you don't need to think about what other modules you need to get a specific method to test your code. If you browse through the documentation, you're going to see that there are actually very good examples that shows you what methods are available and how you should structure your tests. The really basic concept of writing your tests is that you're going to get methods imported by the test::most module where we can provide the data that we got from our functionality as a first argument, then data structure that we expect our functionality to produce. For example, if we provide a function for, let's say, return number 2, that's going to be replaced with just number 2 here, we would say, well, I expect the function to return 2, and the third parameter is going to be just a debugging message. It's really optional. But don't worry about this now, we will look at this in the next video. And if you browse through this module, you can see that there are other various methods where you can quit a test, for example, if it fails, so we don't run any further tests. We can also restore the tests, and so on and so on. But let's not worry about this now. There are many methods that allows us to test our code, and there's no better way how to learn something by doing this in practice. Documentation aside, let's go back to our terminal. And as we know from previous videos, in order to install module, we want to type cpan m, and in this case, since we want to install the test::most module, we're going to say test::most. This is going to take a couple of seconds for you to install. I already have this installed, so it just says that the test::most is already up to date. And once that's done, the next thing that we want to do, we want to create a new directory. You can really name this as you want. It's just a place where you're going to store your tests, so you can name it tests or test, whatever you prefer. I like to store tests in a directory named simply T for tests, and this is where we're going to be creating our test files. So I'm going to create a new file, which is going to be called our test, and the extension we're going to add is going to be .t for test. If you're using Visual Studio Code with materialized icons installed, you're going to see that's already picking it up, this file, as a Perl test. Alright, so we created our test file. First difference you're going to see usually in test files is that they don't start with shebang line, because if we think about it, test files are not really executable. We run the test files, test our code logic, we don't really execute any type of logic. There's no really point of using the shebang line. So let's start by using the pragmas, which is use strict and use warnings. And if you refer to the documentation, you're going to see that when we're using the test::most module, these pragmas, strict and warnings, are already used by default, but it doesn't hurt to define them explicitly. So that's just my personal preference, but if you don't want to do that, then you can just exclude them. And then let's use the test::most module. So use test::most. There are two ways really how you can run your tests. One of the ways is that if you don't know how many tests you're going to run when you're writing the test file, then you can use this keyword, which is no plan, which basically is going to indicate that you don't know how many tests are going to be run in this test file. And if you know how many tests you're going to run, then you can use tests and indicate the number of tests you're going to be running in this file. In our case, we're going to go with no plan. Since we're kind of writing out the tests, it's better to start out with no plan, and once you have finished your test file, then you can declare how many tests you actually have in your test suite. So in case accidentally a test doesn't run, or there is ambiguous logic in a loop where there are too many tests being run and it doesn't really match with what you expected, then the test is going to scream saying that your plan of how many tests you wanted to run doesn't match with how actually many tests were run in the test file. But for now, let's use no plan. And at the end of your test file, you want to introduce done testing keyword. So that's just going to indicate that all the tests we're going to write before that have finished running. Now to actually run the test file, what we can use is a command which is prove, and then you provide your test file name. I'm going to provide the directory t or wherever you created your test file, and our test file name which is our test. So if we run this, all is going to fail, and it's going to fail because we don't really have any tests at this point. We have the test file, but nothing was run there. So technically the test didn't really succeed because there was nothing to test. We're going to look into more keywords in the next lecture, but for now we can use a keyword which is called OK. All this keyword accepts is a single value which is expected to be truthy or falsy. So in this case we can just provide number 1 because we know that 1 is truthy. And if we now rerun the test, we're going to see that this pass. So it's going to say that we have 1 test and all tests were successful. Oh great, we wrote our first test. Let's quickly go back to this second version of actually defining of how many tests we want to run. So if I change this to tests and say that I want to run 1 test, rerun the test itself, we're going to see that all is good because we expected 1 test to be ran. We do have 1 test and it passes. Now if I change this to 2, meaning we are saying to our test file that we want to run 2 tests, but we actually only have 1 test, what we're going to see that this fails. And the reason why it's failed is because it expected 2 tests and it did fail 1. Well, it kind of failed 1 because there wasn't a second test really. So if we just copy this line, which is OK1, and repeat it, rerun the test file, we're going to see that our test passes again. But as I said before, when you're writing out the tests, it kind of makes sense to just use the no plan initially. And we are going to mostly stick with using the no plan because we're just testing random keywords and we don't have any really specific number of tests we're going to run. But in your case, when you do know how many tests you're going to run, I do recommend to explicitly provide the number of tests you're going to run. Alright, so we created our first test file, we looked at the basic skeleton, and we also explored the first keyword we can use, which accepts truthy or falsy value. In the next videos, we're going to look into more keywords and functions that allows you to test nested data structures and to do a lot more functionality in your test files. I hope you found this video useful, and I'll see you at the next one.